First off, gentlemen, introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Steve Allen.
Hi, I'm Ron Flynt.
And I'm Steve Schnee, and this is a little interview with the 2020 we've got here. They could not perform tonight. Tonight was going to be their first live appearance in, 12 years, gentlemen? Is that right?
Yeah, I think, was the last one St. Patrick's Day at South by, Steve? Is that right?
I thought it was Japan in 2008.
No, we did South by after that, I think.
Let's go with Ron's memory.
Yeah. These guys are always arguing. Now, since that show has been canceled because of obviously what's going on in the world, you still want to give your fans something to celebrate, and that's why we're doing this. But before we start the interview, is it thrilling to realize that here it is 40 years later and people are still as passionate about your music as they are or as they've ever been?
Well, I think it's great. I think it's a wonderful thing to be remembered fondly for doing anything. But that first record was pretty good, and I'm glad folks still like it.
I'm with you.
Now, since we're celebrating the anniversary of that first album, the 40th anniversary, I really want to focus on that time period. You both met in Tulsa, and you formed the band, and that turned into a bond, and what seems to me to be more like a lifelong brotherhood. Now, what is it when you decided to move from Tulsa? Why did you choose LA and not any of the other big music meccas like San Francisco or Chicago or New York?
I think it's like Oklahoma is located, at a place in the country that everybody from Leon Russell to Dwight Twilley to Grapes of Wrath just go to California. It's kind of in the code, I think.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you came out here, go ahead, Rob.
Oh, I'm sorry, Steve. Go ahead.
No, you can continue on that because now I'm going to veer off into the music scene.
Well, I was just thinking that I moved out there because Steve did, but it was more than that. When I moved out there, 11 of us that all graduated from Oklahoma State that same year, we all moved out there together within about a 2-week period. I think, I could be wrong, but I think Steve moved out there right around Thanksgiving of the previous year, and then I came out in June, but I went there to play with Steve, so that's the short answer.
That's it.
Now, when you came out here to California, punk was thriving, but so was this 60s guitar pop thing that they were calling new wave and power pop. Were you immediately attracted to the styles of music, or really was it the overall energy that excited you?
Whoa. Well, we'd been playing music so long in Oklahoma. And both of us have been writing songs on our own. And so I don't know, it's just, I don't know how to answer that, Ron. You give it a shot.
Well, I think just before we went out there, or maybe concurrently with Steve going out there, Dwight and Phil had a big hit with I'm on Fire. And that for me was transformational, because that music and that song and that style, and then everything subsequently on Sincerely and then on the first Petty record, were things that really weren't being played that much on the radio at the time. And radio was still was the primary source for music, unlike today. So there was definitely a common thread there between what Dwight and Phil did, and then Petty, of course, was on Shelter, which was a Tulsa label. And then there were a lot of bands in California that were playing like-minded 3-minute guitar-driven pop songs. So yes, there you go.
Well, you started out as a trio with Mike Gallo on drums. How did you end up hooking up with Mike?
When I moved to LA, really just trying to meet people, and I gave a tape to Bump Records of a couple songs that I had that Ron had played on in Oklahoma. And when I was there, I met Mike Gallo, and Gary Spraza and Greg and everybody. So Mike and I got together some, and he just turned me on. He was very excited about music. So he turned me on to a lot of music, and I think we started to write a little bit then. And so and then I think we finally played with him at his apartment by Fairfax, Ron. And we got upstairs in his little apartment. In his bedroom, he had his drum kit. And we went up there and played, and then all the neighbors stopped us from playing on a Saturday or something.
And Mike's roommate was Dave, and Dave was a great guy, very, very into music. And I don't know, was Dave a Buffalo guy too, Steve? I think Straza was a Buffalo guy. Yeah.
Well, did you initially envision the band as a trio, or were you just finding it difficult to find anyone outside the three of you?
I think we were just trying to do what we could do. And yeah, I think that was it. We were open to a fourth, but we just were like, well, let's just work with this while we have this. So it's just, we made a sound. But when we got together with Mike, there was a certain energy we had, and it just seemed to gel.
Yeah. Well, nearly all your contemporaries were picking names with "the" in front of them. What inspired you to decide to choose 2020? And were there any other band names that you were considering? And do you remember any of those?
Well, I seem to recall that it was Gary Spraza that originally thought of the name, but it might have been Mike.
I think it was Mike.
It was one of the Buffalo contingent who thought it up. Yeah. I don't think Steve and I have been through so many goofy band names all the way back to the sixth grade. So 2020 seemed as good as any of them to me.
I remember we had a list on a piece of paper, and one of them was the Refrigerators. And one of them, I'm going to say, but my father's name was Johnny, and he had passed away, so it was a punk time. So we were the Dead Johnnies. No, but as I recall, Mike Gallo.
Weren't we the rebels?
The what?
Weren't we the rebels, the Dead Johnnies?
But I think Mike came up in 2020, and we just kind of had to grow into it, you know.
Now, did you guys already have a large cachet of songs written by the time the band had formed? I think you had mentioned already that, Steve, you had been writing songs. So you had already built up a large volume of tracks?
I had a few things. I had the Giving It All Under the Freeway songs from the Bomb first single. Mm-hmm. So, and that had actually been recorded already in Oklahoma with Ron playing on it, and Phil Seymour played drums on that. And then we brought it to LA, and I finished it at United Western. So we had that, but Ron and I got together, and with Mike too, and we just started writing new songs. And some of them have never been heard.
And for good reason.
Well, how long of a time span was it from the first rehearsal to the first gig?
Was the first gig, Steve, that French bakery over by Mike's house? Is that the very first one where the UCLA film folks came out? Was that the first show?
I think that was yeah, I think you're right. It was our very first actual show. But what we did, Stephen, is we at the Wilshire Fine Arts place where X was rehearsing and all these other great LA bands, this real dump place, but it was all we could afford. And we rehearsed for about a solid year of writing and just kind of getting our sound together. And so we were dying to play by that point.
Well, do you remember what the set list would have been like? Or did any of those songs, like from those first couple shows, did any of them survive all the way to the first album?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. I think Remember the Lightning and Sherry, Backyard Guys. Wasn't that one of the real early ones, Steve?
Yeah, I think you're right about those three, and then She's an Obsession, probably.
Right.
was
yeah.
there. And then a lot of them, like Going Up With My Girl is one that maybe it'll come out someday. But we had some early ones that, in fact, Drive,
yeah,
which later on Bomb.
Yeah.
But I remember Ron and I driving in your Biscayne car to Fairfax, and we were going over lyrics, and we were so like excited and nervous because we hadn't played together live in so long, right? And will we remember the lyrics?
Well, in those early days, were there any clubs that stood out as being particularly good, bad, or shitholy?
Well, I think there was a degree of shitholiness to most of them, but the early gig that strikes me that with the most profound memory is Bump Night at the Whiskey. There were a bunch of bands on the bill, and everybody just played one or two songs. Now, I'm going to tell my memory of this gig, and I think it's right, but it's been a minute. So we were the last ones put on this bill. There was a big, I don't know if you call them a big name headliner. They couldn't have been too big because I don't remember who they were. But I remember the Zeros were on the bill, and they were great. And so the night is going along, and they're not putting us up. So finally, Greg Shaw there's a stairwell that goes from backstage down to the stage at the Whiskey, and I'm standing on that stairwell with Greg and Bunny Carlos, and Greg says, "Well, I don't think you guys are going to get to play." And Bunny says, "No, you got to let him play. You got to let him play." So we went up and we played on the headliner's gear, and Bunny had no idea who we were. He was just being Bunny Carlos. So that's my memory of how we got to play. And we did, I think, Steve, we did Hippie Hippie Shake and Going Up With My Girl. And I think that was all we played. But I also remember it being a resounding success and feeling great about
it. It went over really great. And is that when we had Ian Whitcomb? Didn't we back up Ian Whitcomb doing You Turn Me On? We're trying to
about that. No, I don't think that's the same
we
night.
really have not talked about this, but I didn't know that about Bunny Carlos and the Stairs. So I don't know where I was, but that was a really great gig. That was really right. And I don't even think the single was out yet.
Oh, I don't think it was. And one thing that was very cool about it is everybody else played on their own gear, but we got to play on the headliner's gear, which had been sound checked and sounded great. And I remember swinging for the fences and just being ecstatic about how it all worked out.
Yeah, it was you and me and Mike Gallo up there just away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, during this period, what other bands did you share the stage with, within that first year? I mean, you had mentioned, Steve, I think that you had played with the Knack.
We did. I think that was at the Troubadour, first time we played there.
Right.
And God, there's so many. I probably should have done my homework, but bands like the Zeros, who did we play with, Rob? Plimsolls eventually?
Oh, the Plimsolls, the Cats, who later became the New Cats, I think. The No, played with the No a bunch.
But that's true. But Stephen, what really got us some attention was when we finally did a month-long residency at Madame Wong's.
Yeah.
I think it was every Tuesday, maybe.
Right.
And so that was when things really began to pick up steam.
Well, was the songwriting between you guys, was that a friendly competition? I mean, were you inspired by each other's songs and really secretly were striving to top each other?
Well, I would say being in a songwriting competition with Steve Allen is a fool's errand. He's a great songwriter. So I was just hoping to get a song or two on the record. That was my goal. And honestly though, when you're writing with somebody like Steve, it does push you a little bit. You want to do your best, because otherwise you're not gonna, you may not land songs on the record.
No, man, we were both inspired by each other and by Mike Gallo. And in fact, I just found a tape of Mike and I called in sick at my day job, and he came over with a snare and a hi-hat and a bass drum, and I've got the tape of us writing Tell Me Why. And I just found this last week, and it was just, we were just trying to create and create. So,
well, as you were building up this repertoire and obviously playing all these great gigs, could you tell us a little bit about maybe some, not so much the artists that you played with, but maybe some of the people that showed up to see you, you know, once the press started building?
wow. You mean like when we played?
Like before we got signed, is that what you mean?
Yeah, like you know, some of the celebrities and the artists that would come to see you guys.
Oh, well, of course, there was the one night at Madame Wong's that sticks in the memory when Brian Wilson and Tom Petty were there, and we were friends with Stan Lynch from the Heartbreakers. So that was, I guess you could say that was a star-studded night. Hey, what was that guy from American Graffiti? Steve, you remember him? He used to come to the shows a bunch, and now I can't think of his name. He played.
Oh, you mean the guy Terry Toad?
Thank you. There you go.
But probably a really good one was when we played the Troubadour. I think that's when we opened for the Knack, and Phil Spector came backstage, and I think he ended up in our dressing room,
right.
and that began, which we were just like, oh my God, you know. So that ended up, we ended up hanging out with Phil for like 7 or 8 times.
Yeah, I think it was Rodney Bingenheimer brought him, right?
I think Rodney brought Brian Wilson.
Oh, well, see, there you go, morphing them all together a little bit.
well, do you have any interesting stories about Phil Spector, or should those remain on the cutting room floor?
Phil was an amazing guy, and we would stay up really late in his mansion, and he would tell us all these rock and roll stories. And in fact, he let me bring my cassette player. I said, Phil, is it okay if I record you? And he would talk about Richie Valens's funeral and the Beatles in the studio. And we were just eating it up. It was amazing.
Yeah. A lot of great Beatles stories.
Were you actually considering him as a producer, or was he considering producing you at that time?
I think what he said was he wanted to produce 3 kind of new acts, and we were one of the ones he was interested in. And I don't know if we really were taking that real seriously, but we were just so in rock and roll heaven. I mean, it was early in the bands once we started playing out. But he ended up doing the Ramones, you know, and a couple other acts. But we never actually went into studio or anything.
Well, you finally found
that Mike had some really good and well thought out ideas about producers, and I don't remember Phil being on Mike's list. But
no, it was almost like he kind of liked our friendship, and that he respected, and he just wanted to have some friends come over. Really, is what it felt like.
He was lonely, I think, and he never wanted you to leave. He wanted the night to go on and on. But you know, I don't know that you can really talk about him now without just kind of adding that he was kind of a dick. You know, he look what he did, and he was. So.
But he was a fascinating, eccentric genius.
Yep.
Well, you finally found a 4th member in Chris Silagyi, or Silagyi, which is how I always read it. But wasn't there someone else before that that actually turned you down as being a fourth member of 2020?
Maybe you mean Peter Case?
Yes.
But that really was not how it happened. I remember our friend from Bop Records, Gary Spraza, it was kind of his idea, and we were just we knew the Nerves, and we thought they were great. And Peter came to a rehearsal at the Wiltern Fine Arts, and we made some music together that day, but it was really like he had all of his own songs, and we had a bunch going by then. It just would have been too many cooks, I think, in that kitchen. So it was a mutual thing. It wasn't like turned down or really never got to anything. He was a friend of ours.
Right. Well, how did you meet Chris to begin with? Same way?
Gosh,
I think
Mike. I think Mike knew him. I've always thought that, and I don't really know why.
I know that we wanted to add a fourth member. I think it was Shelley Heber, maybe our manager.
You may be right about that. Yeah.
But he had a really good demo tape, and we really were looking to flesh out the band. He could play some keyboard, he could play rhythm and some lead, and he could sing. So that happened pretty fast, as I remember, and then we got really busy. Like the beginning of '79, I think is when he joined.
Right.
That was a trend. That was a big moment for the act too, when Chris came along, because then the arranging ideas could be more fleshed out, and the harmonies were better. He was a great singer. Probably is still a great singer.
Yeah, and I remember we had a chance to really. So I've been listening to all these old demos and things, and we really did work those songs. Those songs on the first album really got tested in the clubs.
Oh yeah.
So it was so great if you can do that, where you can play live and then realize, I'd like to move this part over here before you do the recording. So we were a tight band by the time we did the first album with Chris and Mike.
Yeah, you had obviously done the single with Bomp, but you eventually signed with Portrait Records for the album deal. Were there other labels interested? And if so, why did you choose Portrait?
Well, we did do I guess you'd call it an audition for Clive Davis at SIR. Nobody else, it's just him. Maybe he had an assistant with him. We were up on this little SIR rehearsal stage, and he's like this mythic character sitting on a couch in the back room. All right, kids, show me what you got, kind of thing. And so I don't know, maybe we played 4 or 5 songs, and I heard from Shelley that what he said was, well, why do I want them? I've already got Dwight Twilley. So he passed on us. But at that point, we already had the CBS deal, as I recall, right, Steve?
Man, your memory is better than mine on this. But I do remember we're in our apartment on Formosa or one of those places, and Sycamore, and Clive Davis called on the telephone.
Right.
And I think you talked, but it was like we were just still like these guys from Oklahoma that couldn't believe any of this was happening. So it's crazy.
That's interesting you say that, Steve, because in some ways, I always thought, well, this is exactly how it's supposed to happen. And at the time, I didn't appreciate just how staggeringly rare it is for the three of us, you, me, and Mike, to wander into Hollywood and get a major label recording contract. And now I look back on it and think, I wish I'd appreciated the rarity of it more.
Well, you went in the studio with Earl Mankey, who engineered and produced that first album. Was he your choice or the label's choice?
No, it wasn't the label's choice, I don't think.
No, they weren't involved in that at all. I think it was Mike, but Steve, you may know more about it.
All I remember is we were a lot of people approached us that were really great, but Earl just seemed, he had just done the pop record. I know
Right.
that. And it just felt right with Earl, you know?
And he
Earl's a great guy.
worked for the Beach Boys a bunch, and obviously Sparks too. But he was a great fit right from the very beginning, and he was also really kind and generous with his knowledge, and he was patient. I'm sure even though Stephen, Mike, and I had done a bunch of recording, especially Steve and I going all the way back to Oklahoma, but we were neophyte on that level of recording, and he was a great person to work with.
Yeah, he took us into Western Sound City, which was a great studio. So,
yeah.
Well, how did you decide on choosing the songs that eventually made that first album?
whew, what do you think, Ron?
Well, I think to some degree, given how long we've been playing, a lot of that was already kind of baked into the cake. We had done
Sure.
demos at this little studio called Kitchen Sink that the label really liked them, and when the label would come see us play, we were drawing pretty good sized crowds, and you could tell what songs got the big reactions. Yellow Pills, Jet Lag, Tell Me Why. Those were songs that you knew they were going on the record. There may have been a couple of late arrivals, as my recollection is that Leaving Your World Behind was something that was written just before we started recording. But yeah, the songs were pretty much set by the time we got to that.
Well, we had Remember the Lightning, and
Yeah,
we
we
had
had that.
Sherry.
Yeah.
We had Obsession, and I think Yellow Pills and Leaving Your World Behind came in at the later part, right before the record.
Were there songs recorded during the sessions that remain in the vault, or did you stick with this batch of songs and that's all you recorded?
I don't think there were any extra songs.
I don't think there were. I think it was. I think it was pretty much set.
Well, what about a lot of the other demos from this period? Is there any chance that you'll be releasing those?
Well, there's always a chance. I think down the line some things will probably come out someday. But even, some of it is on the web now in really lo-fi quality. So it could happen.
There's a lot of people who would probably really appreciate that. In fact, if you'd like, I'll trade you a Slinky for some demos.
You drive a hard bargain there, Steve.
Now, do you remember the feeling that you had when listening to that album for the first time?
I tell you, I remember. Well, we were pretty granular about the production of that record. We were involved in everything. We didn't do a session and go away and come back later and Earl would say, "Well, here you go, guys. Here's the record." But I remember the first mastering session at the CBS mastering plant, where the engineer would. This is quite a while ago, so it was a different mastering process than it is now. But he turned to us and said, "Now you guys just sit over there." And so that's essentially what we did. We just sat there, but we listened to it at the post-mastering acetate, and that to me was just a wonderful experience to hear it come bouncing out of the speakers after it had been properly mastered.
Right.
Yeah, for me though, hearing it on the big speakers at Sound City was, I mean, that's in the days when they had those giant Altec speakers or whatever they were, and hearing it really loud. I don't even know if we heard it all then. I think mastering maybe is the first time we heard the whole album at once.
That may be right, because we would leave it with cassette playback stuff, so it wasn't like we were hearing first generation top quality until that mastering experience, and then blasting it out of those big speakers at Sound City.
Was it obvious on that first listen that certain songs like Yellow Pills and Sherry were standouts and sort of destined to be either radio hits or singles?
Oh, I thought Yellow Pills was a pretty good bet. But at the time also there was this thing about this Reagan era drug culture reaction. So you could almost bet that certain radio stations weren't going to play, which in some ways might have been good for its popularity. How people like to tune into the taboo. But I thought Yellow Pills was gonna land pretty good.
Well, I'll go with Remember the Lightning.
I'll go with pretty much everything. I thought that maybe The Sky is Falling should have been a B-side, but now, did it surprise you that Yellow Pills, I don't believe it was pulled as a single, although it was probably your most played track on the radio at that time?
I think that at that point, that CBS or they were concerned, like Ron said, with it being a drug reference, and mainly singles at that point were still pushed to AM radio.
Mm-hmm.
So FM pretty much went on that, and actually they went on a bunch of the songs, which was amazing. But yeah, we could look at if it would have been a different climate slightly, or if MTV would have existed, things would have been a little more popular maybe.
Yeah. Well, there's not a song on the album that isn't referenced by power pop fans today. I mean, every single track is considered a classic, apart from The Sky is Falling. How does that make you feel all these years later?
Well, wow. Just to have anybody appreciate any record that you've made is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And if people have found some happiness and a warm sense of nostalgia now when they go back and they play that record, and it's a place and time in their life where they can peg the songs to things that happened to them, I think that's fantastic, and really, really lucky, really fortunate to have a little place in some people's lives. I just love it.
I go with what he said.
Yeah, I mean, it's still an impactful album, and I think that we're all still feeling that today. But looking back, would you have changed anything on the album? Was there something when the album first came out that you thought we could have done that better? I mean, now, of course, in hindsight, knowing that everybody loves every moment of that album, you may not think that way, but back then, were you thinking that you could have done something better or changed something?
Yes.
Did you?
I did. Yeah.
I didn't really worry about it. It was what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what did you wonder about, Ron?
Oh, I think I could have sung Jet Lag better. I remember we triple tracked the vocal because I just wasn't. I might not have been getting it where Mike wanted it, and I could have done that better. I could have played better on a thing or two, but I've made a record or two since then, and I've never made one where I don't have these mm-hmm. same ideas, these same feelings of trying to drill down too deep on things. I have a good friend, Walt Wilkins. He says it's a record, it's a recording of where you are today. You're not going to be there tomorrow. You gotta let it go. But I sometimes have a hard time heeding that advice.
It's funny that you mentioned Jet Lag, because that's one, well, still today, but back then, I'd always pick the needle up and put it right back to the start of that song and listen to it all the way through under the headphones, lift the needle up, put it back. I mean, I must have worn out at least 4 or 5 copies of that first album, but thankfully we have it, thankfully we have it on CD, even though you can't see it because of my background there. There you go, the CD.
It looked kind of spooky.
Yeah, I know. It's disappear. But what you guys have probably seen the Shake Some Action book by John Borak. How did it feel to get to, or to be named as the #1 album in his book, Shake Some Action 2.0? It's the #1 power pop album.
Really surprised and honored, and thanks, John. Love you, man.
Now, it's been 22 years since your last studio album, your last 2020. Can we expect any new music from the band?
Well, I'd say another 22 years will go by, and then we're working on it, Stephen. Yeah, I think you can. I feel really good about the new stuff that we just made. So that we're making.
We've been working on stuff. I've been flying to Austin, and it's going really good. And Ron's son Ray is playing drums with us. So we've got this young band kind of energy,
Yeah.
and but we're gonna have to do a little, over the phone lines or however you put it. But I want to come back, Ron. Let me come back. This little minor thing is going on in the world right now, so it might take us a little while, but we're very excited and we're writing new songs and it's growing.
Now, I have a few fan questions. Let me see here if any of them are appropriate. Let me see here. Now, first off, Danny Silverman writes that I love their uncharacteristically synth-poppy American Dream from the second album. Were you consciously emulating the great Jonah Louie? And the first thing I thought of is, will they know who Jonah Louie is?
I do not. So I think it might be safe to say that we weren't.
Yeah, but see, Danny's a great guy, and he's like a nerd like me. So I always know. Well, I don't want to put him down by saying he's a nerd. I'm a nerd. He may not be.
Wait, Stephen, maybe they were influenced by Ron.
Now, okay, another question. Brainwash City had asked about the confirmation that Phil played on the Bump single, and you guys confirmed that earlier. And of course, let me see here. Paul Kalfa's mentioned about the early 2020 demo recordings being officially released. I'm not the only one, guys. And let me see here. Is there anything more that can be said about demo tracks or other unreleased material the band may have throughout the years?
Well, I don't know. I think we did a version of Shake Some Action, but that's been released, and I don't know. I think most of, like what Steve Allen said earlier, is that a lot of it's already out there on the internet. And if there was a way to tart up the audio and make it sound better, I would not have as much reluctance about those things being out there. But some of the audio is just so bad. It's not a fair representation of not fair, unfair. I mean, it's just not a good representation of what it really sounded like. Now, if we could make it sound a lot better, I'd be all for it coming out.
Mm-hmm. Well, I remember specifically, I went and saw 2020 at the Golden Bear after the first album came out, and you both, or actually all you members, donned sunglasses and did Life in the CIA.
Oh yeah.
Which is obviously before Life in the USA. And then you also did a song called I Want to Hurt Her. And I know that was probably emotionally and not physically, so it's still, fairly okay. But I remember that song, and I heard it once at that one gig. And do you know if there's any recorded version of that?
I have not found it.
That was a Stillwater song, right, Steve?
I don't know about that.
I think it's we have there was our good friend Pat Garrett and Steve and I had a band called the Fugitives in Stillwater, and this was right at the dawn of the New York punk scene, and we had a song called Barbie Doll and Hammer, which a tender love song, as you can imagine, and then there was Hold My Head, She's Just Brainwashed, I Want to Hurt Her. Yeah, so
I think your memory might be transfusing a few, and that's okay. But
okay. I tend to do that, I know.
I think I wrote it in LA because I had never really had a relationship or a thing end, and it was a girl that ended it. So yeah, I might have had a couple of hard feelings there.
Well,
Really?
Rod,
Who was that?
It happened.
Oh, okay. All right.
Roger Smith asks, I heard that Steve has been working on a screenplay for a movie or series for Netflix. What's that all about?
That is my friend, Roger, and thanks for asking that question. But we did we worked on a little thing, and if someone in Hollywood needs another screenplay, we got a good idea.
Okay. Well, thank you for that question, Roger, Steve's friend. Now, let me see. Writes, let me see. What were some of Steve and Ron's favorite contemporary artists or albums in the late 70s? And did any of the LA groups in particular influence the 2020s sound?
Well, Dwight and Phil, obviously. I loved the early Cheap Trick stuff. Actually, I love all their stuff. Tom Petty, that first Tom Petty record was very influential. I just remember playing it constantly. Steve and I shared a little one-bedroom apartment, a Hobart Continental, over in sort of East LA, East Hollywood. But the Plimsouls, I always loved everything that they did, and I think you could go out and see a band just about any night of the week and find something that if you wanted to, you find something that you really liked about them. Obviously, oh yeah, Elvis Costello and the Cars.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. There were so many good bands in LA playing that it was kind of like an inspiration. I think we were all inspiring each other, even when the Go-Go's came out, and so many great bands at that period.
Yeah, some of the other questions were things that we had already touched on during the interview. But as we close this out, do you have anything? Well, first off, props and love to the other guys in the band, Mike Gallo and Chris Silagyi. I'll never get his name right. I'm sorry, Chris. But is there anything that you would like to say to your fans?
Wow. Well, first let me thank Mike Gallo and Chris Silagyi, who, were invaluable at that point in time. And Mike helping us create the band with all of his energy, and Chris coming in and bringing it together in such a solid way that, I just want them to know that.
We were so lucky to meet up with the players and the producers and engineers and people that kind and generous. Shelley Heber did so much for us that you really. It's hard to imagine that any of it might have happened had it not been for her. And then there were also the people. She had a company, Image. There was Cecilia and Lindy and Victoria and the people that worked so hard for us, not just because it was a job, but because they liked the music. And so there's so many people to be grateful to and be grateful for. I'm sure I'm leaving out a whole bunch. There's Joel and Richie and Bill and Jerry Heller, the late Jerry Heller, was our agent who helped us quite a bit. David Altschul, attorney. The guys at Enigma Records, they the fellows that put out Sex Trap. So yeah, there's a lot of people to be thankful for.
Yeah, and just anyone, like Ron said early on, that is listening to music we made 40 years ago
Yeah,
and appreciating it. But I just thank every single one of them, and
absolutely.
And people in the power pop community like you, just
Yes.
keeping this alive, this kind of music alive, is so important.
Yeah, one of the high points of my career was high points of my life. I don't think I really have a career, but one of the high points of my life was making the suggestion to Real Gone Music to release this. And I even,
Yeah.
I even was remembered to say, well, Oleo Records had put it out, but they left off the 2 B-sides from The Strange Side of Love. And so they added those, and it was such an honor to work with both of you. Ronnie Barnett from the Muffs supplied a lot of the, the promo material and stuff in there, because he's a big fan as well. Yeah, so Ronnie's a great guy and a longtime supporter of your guys as well.
A fine Texan. a proud Texan.
Yeah, actually, he is.
Yeah, I think he's from Houston.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love what you wrote, Stephen. I mean, I remember getting that like 2012 or 13 or somewhere.
Yeah, whatever.
Out. And I felt like you just summed us up so well, and I was just really proud of that release.
You sure have been kind to us, Stephen. We appreciate it too.
Well, I mean, I could never pay you guys back for what you've given all of us. So you guys, sit there and you maybe come up with a few chords and a few words, and to you it's exciting to create that, but to us, you are actually creating the soundtrack to so many lives, and we are very grateful for everything that you have given us throughout the years, including your solo releases. I wanted to throw that out. Steve, I'm sorry, I still can't track those down for a decent price.
I've got them. I'll send them to you, Stephen.
Are you sitting on those, Ron?
I've got several of them. I sure do.
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
I tell you,
He's got a 30 count box.
Yeah. But I got to tell you, we really are excited about some of the new music, and man, to tell everybody, we so wish we were playing these songs for you tonight.
Okay, see if you guys can sync it.
I found it.
Well, one of the things I want to close with, and this is really kind of a weird little thing. I had recently divorced my first wife, and I was living in California, and I would have to fly up to Oregon to get my daughter, fly her back, spend a few days. And so one of the years, and it must have been, oh my gosh, I don't know, definitely 2008, 2009, whatever. But I'd flown up, and it was, what year did the 4-Day Tornado come out?
Oh gosh, it had to be 90 something, right?
96 maybe?
Okay, so it must have been, yeah, so it must have been the late 90s. So I dropped my daughter off at the airport, and I'm waiting for her mom to pick her up. And all of a sudden, this tall, lanky guy walks by, and he's pulling this cart. And I look at the instruments, and stenciled on the instruments is 2020. And I go, holy crap, that's Ron Flynt, right? So I'm just about, but my daughter's here. Then my wife shows up, or my ex-wife, to get my daughter. And then all of a sudden, Steve Allen comes walking by. So I grab Steve Allen. I go, oh my God, I'm a huge fan. And Steve's like surprised, but he's very happy. And I told him, because at that time I would play 2020. And my daughter, who was probably about 6 or 7 at that time, she loved Tell Me Why. She would sit there, and every time that song would come on, she'd be sitting there going, tell me why. And she'd walk around the house singing that. So I told Steve that while we're standing there outside the airport, and he walks up to my daughter, leans over, and starts singing the chorus to Tell Me Why to her. And just the look on her face, and I'm going, this is that guy. This is the real guy. And that moment is something that I will cherish. It's just as much as the time I put the needle on the first album, and it changed the way that I thought about everything, about music.
Man,
and
that's so
wonderful
sweet.
things.
That's a great story.
But
that's a good story right there.
But we all appreciate everything that you guys have done, and we all appreciate you taking the time. I know that this is a terrible time out there, and you guys had to cancel your show, but to get together and to do this and offer something to the fans is really, really super important. I mean, I'd love to cover the whole career, and we will probably do that at some point, maybe when the new album comes out. But we really wanted to focus on the first album here. And, you know, thanks to Chris over here and Mike over there. And and thank you to both of you for taking the time and sharing your memories with all of us.
Well, thank you, Stephen. Thank you, everybody. We'll be back.